Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Good morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it is for you folks.
Today, we are going to talk about what you need to do when you get to a point where you can't do 3 sets of 5 3 times a week every workout anymore, or when you get to a point where your newbie gains are exhausted, right? Or it gets hard.
Whoa. Hold on a minute. Are you telling me that I can't do 3 sets of 5 forever?
No, you can't do 3 sets of 5 forever. I mean, you can. People do it, and it's not a very productive use of your time. But this whole idea that, you have to, end the novice program at the highest weight possible, specifically on the squat, at the expense of the other lifts often enough, is kind of absurd. I've seen guys that will eliminate every lift so they can keep adding weight to the squat 3 times a week because their 3x5 PR done 3 times a week is the focus of their life. And, I know some of those guys are probably listening, but I think a lot of people aren't going to do that because most people end up hating the squat and debating quitting lifting over it. So that is the more common thing that I see.
I still have an argument with myself, years and years later. Like, fuck, I don't want to squat anymore. Fuck this. I'm just going to stop lifting.
Likewise.
No, I'll squat anyway.
Yeah.
I've just squatted. I'm like that. There's like some Greek like tragic figure. Is it Sisyphus or someone else? I don't know. I can't remember. But he's like, it's like I've been squatting so long, I just can't imagine life without squatting. But it's like, it doesn't mean I like it.
Yep, exactly. So, let's talk about that for a second. So, and I want to bridge in a second topic into this too, because the other question is, how do I run starting strength for fat loss? And this ties into this topic. So hold that thought. We're going to come back to that too, because it's all part of the same deal. So first things first, if you're a novice, you're going to add weight to the bar more frequently than an intermediate or an advanced lifter. Your level of advancement is defined by your ability to recover, the rate at which you recover specifically, which means that the guy who recovers faster is more novice than the guy who takes longer to recover. And the way that we kind of structure our novice program is based off of the novice linear progression outlined in Starting Strength, basic barbell training. And, you squat 3 times a week. That is a purely linear program. You're doing 3 sets of 5. The only thing that changes is load. So the squat is probably the lift that stays the most linear for the majority of the program. And reason for that is it uses the most muscle mass. And the deadlift stays linear for the first 2 to 4 weeks. And then the press and the bench press alternate, and then you throw in a chin-up in there every other workout, or a pull-down if you can't do a chin-up. And the whole idea is that you're adding weight frequently. So the squat and the deadlift, you're adding weight every single workout, which is every 2 days. Every 48 hours, you're recovered. You can do a heavier weight than last time. So you may do 135 for 3 sets of 5 on the squat and 185 for a set of 5 on the deadlift. On Monday, then Wednesday, you're going to do 145 and 205. And then Friday, you're going to do 155 and 225, right? This is week 1. Not everybody will be able to make those jumps, but it's quite often I see that happen.
Yeah, that would be like a younger male absolutely would be appropriate to make in that first week some bigger jumps.
Males under 50 can pull that off, typically.
Yeah.
Very often, and I find that a lot of males don't because they're afraid of the deadlift. They think that it's heavier than it is. That's a problem. That's a whole other topic.
I will also say that I do run into, and it definitely, especially if you were being coached in person, like if you're actually going to a starting strength gym, that's possible. I often, with people that I'm working with online, will have them make smaller jumps, not because they can't make those jumps, but because the nature of the feedback when you're working with someone online is often such that, we can't get things quite right the first session. So it takes 3 or 4 workouts to dial something in where it would have taken one, really half a workout in person. So
that's right.
That's right. And it's fine. It's fine. It doesn't, that's beside the point really. If you go slow, you'll end up in the same point pretty quickly anyway.
Yeah, that's right. So, you're adding weight to the bar every workout on the squat. You're adding weight to the bar every workout on the deadlift. And then you're alternating the press and the bench press for the first month or so, for the first 2 to 4 weeks. Then the deadlift alternates with the power clean or some sort of lighter pull, and the chin up gets introduced every bench press workout, so every other workout. Later on, as you progress, the program continues to change. You have a squat that's light in between the two heavy squats. You might add a pause. You might do a front squat if you're a weightlifter. There's different things you can do. And the deadlift may drop, to every other press workout, which is every 9 days. You're deadlifting, and you're alternating that with a glute ham device or something on the opposite day, which works out every 9 days. I don't tend to do it that way. A lot of guys don't. I tend to, deadlift once a week, at the end of the linear progression. So it'd be a deadlift, a chin up, and a lighter pull. But there's different ways to, skin that cat.
And a light pull can also be, if you're one of these home gym guys, you don't have a lot of equipment, a light pull can be as simple as like a little bit more volume for 80%. So something I very commonly do is I'll alternate the heavy pull with 2 sets of 5, so a little bit more volume than the heavy day, and I'll do those 2 sets of 5 at 80% of the previous heavy day. That's just kind of a ballpark number, but it's pretty good estimate. It's light enough, it's heavy enough to get you some work, but it's light enough to serve as a recovery for your back between those heavy pulls.
And that's pretty reasonable. So you've heard me throw out a few things that change in the program. Remember, the squat is linear pretty much the entire time. Maybe last month or two you're doing a light one in between, but you're pretty much on a purely linear program. So what does linear mean? So this all comes from quote-unquote exercise science literature, which really means academic journals that, provide maybe an ounce more evidence than a Men's Fitness, if that. I publish some abstracts myself, so I'm including myself in this criticism. There's just so much you're not controlling when people are exercising, but scientists like to pretend they're controlling more than they're not. And journalists and fitness publications try to do the same in different ways, using different forms of hyperbole and puffery, I noticed that both academics and fitness journalists, or whatever you want to call them, or influencers, quote unquote, on social media, they do the same shit. They have different language they use, but they're basically puffing their methods for, identifying what works and what doesn't. You might have the guy say, like C.T. Fletcher back in the day, oh, I'll tell you how to get 22 arms. I did arms every motherfucking day, And
arms every day.
Every day did motherfucking arms on Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, his motherfucking birthday. Every damn day he trained arms. I used to watch this and crack up while I was lifting, so hence the verbatim quote. But he's basically giving an N of one anecdote, and inflating it, saying that this is how it's going to work for you because it worked for me, right? Right. These scientists will say, well, we had them in a lab, and we use percentage of 1RM, which we all know that they're not actually producing a 1RM because these people aren't power lifters and have no experience to do that. Most of them are novices or lightly trained novices that fucked around in the gym for a few months and kept the same level of strength for 3 years and then entered a study and said they were experienced. That was me.
Yeah,
that was me. I fucked around the gym and maintained my strength for years. But I considered myself advanced at the time, I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. But then, they'll write their conclusions and say, oh yeah, this 12-week progressive program produced superior hypertrophy with machines versus free weights or isolation versus compounds. That's the latest line of shit that I've seen. But at the end of the day, they didn't control for their diet, They there's no report of what technique was used, They'll say, oh, muscles contract and relax. That doesn't matter. There's stupid things like that. But at the end of the day, they're just basically spinning. They're basically salesmen with extensive vocabularies. They have a different language than your personal trainer at LA Fitness, but they're doing the same shit. They have limited evidence, and they're trying to make it sound like they are facts, which is the same thing the bro personal trainer, or the bodybuilder, or the influencer is doing. So one day we will do an episode on deciphering the academia speak. But until then,
I like go back to by the way, good vocabulary word, by the way, puffery. I like that you use that word. That's a
legal term.
Yeah,
it's a legal term.
That's because puffery is that's legal, right? Because you're not making false claims or misleading claims necessarily. You're just sort of like, pumping up your claims to, your value proposition, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, Trent, my program's the best ever. Prove it's not.
Yeah, right. Now, if you said that my program will get you 46.8-inch quads, and then it guaranteed in 90 days, then maybe I could sue you over that if I cared to.
That's a false claim.
Something like that.
False claim.
Yeah.
But,
okay.
Yeah. But I learned it probably 10 or 15 years ago, and then about 10 years ago. Then later we were at SSCA 4 or 5 years ago, and Brody used that term. One of our coaches, who's now I believe he's a prosecutor up in California, federal prosecutor. But I remember him using that term when he was going over legalese stuff related to this business, and I'm like, I know that word, But anyhow, back to what I was saying about the word linear. So linear progression, in academia speak, refers to linear periodization. So periodization is a quote-unquote exercise science term that appears in strength and conditioning journals, and some of the articles are pretty useful, and a lot of the older stuff from the 70s and 80s, the stuff written by Mike Stone and those guys, a lot of it checks out, with things we do out in the field. Those guys were weightlifters, so they used it for a different purpose. But it's just a way to say that you're planning your programming towards a goal, and they kind of look at this as big cycles, right? So if you're an Olympian, you're training over the course of 4 years, so they would consider that a macro cycle, right? And then
in between Olympic events,
right. And then the let's say you're doing several 12-week programs between year 1 and year 4, right? Those are meso cycles, and then your weekly program is your micro cycle, right? So these are just fancy words for little blocks of training that you do,
Yeah, I think about back to science class, in high school. Like they're like in physics, we talk about things that have a period, like a planet orbiting the sun. Would have a period that's the length of days it takes to fully orbit the sun. So yeah, it's kind of like with training cycles. It's something cycles from one event, around to the next. Around back to that event again at some point in the future. So that's your period. So periodization is kind of waving between one event and another event.
Exactly. And you determine, macro, meso, micro, depending on what the end goal is, right? So if I do one meet a year, everything between the meet this year and the meet next year will be a macro cycle, the whole thing, the 1 year period, right? An Olympian's a 4-year macro cycle. And then you do typically 12-week programs are popular. You know why? Because in academia, there's 16 weeks in a semester. One of them's finals week. So 12 weeks is really all you got between recruiting them, testing them, getting them started, and finishing them. You've lost those other 4 weeks between start and finish. You end up with 12. So that's why 12-week cycles are so popular. But in general, how long can
I never thought about that.
No, that's why. That's because academic semester is 15 weeks plus finals week. And then you have to recruit, test, enroll, consent. That takes, weeks in the beginning. And then you end up starting a month into the semester, leaving you 12 more weeks,
That makes sense. Yeah, right. Yeah, it makes sense.
So anyhow, but then in practice, it works out that way. 12 weeks isn't going to get you to your end goal. It's a mesocycle, But, how long are you going to stay on a rep range beyond being a novice, right? You're not, typically a novice can be on 5s for 6 to 9 months if he's an 18-year-old kid and has never done anything before, right? But, as you advance, you don't want to do 5s for fucking 9 months, maybe a month at a time is typically pretty good for each rep range once you become advanced enough for that. But that's not what we're talking about today. The reason I even brought any of this up is because periodization starts the moment you go in the gym. So like I said, the squat is on a linear periodization program, because what that means is that the only thing that changes is intensity. So the weight on the bar, right? Intensity is the weight on the bar. So your reps are exactly the same every workout. Your sets are exactly the same every workout. And the exercise is exactly the same every workout. The only thing that changes is load. That's what makes it linear. The deadlift starts out this way. You do deadlift every workout. You add weight to it every workout. You change nothing else. You do 1 set of 5, 3 if you're a female. But then after week 2 or 3, maybe 4, things start to change. Now you're alternating the deadlift with a power clean, right? So you got a couple things going on there, right? The load is getting lighter, right? And the exercise is changing. So there are other terms for that in the periodization world. So if you're alternating the exercise, you can call that conjugating the movement, right? So that's a form of periodization, the conjugate method, right?
Right. Yep.
If you are doing a smaller percentage of, I guess, max, you don't have a max at that point, but if you're doing a lower intensity to facilitate active recovery, that's why you power clean. So you're still pulling, but you're letting your back recover from the heavy set of 5 deadlifts you did 2 days before, right?
Yeah, so, it's naturally lighter.
Yep. So that would be considered undulating. You're undulating the load. So
right.
7 years ago, I haven't seen this word float around so much in social media land, but 7 years ago, everybody was jerking off to DUP,
DUP, yeah.
2012 to 2014, 2015, DUP was the obsession, daily undulated periodization. So all that means is that you're going heavy one day, you're going lighter another day, and then, if you're doing HLM, which I'll segue into, you're doing medium the other day, if that. Sometimes people only do a lift twice a week, so it's more.
I remember this, like DUP, that confused the heck out of me for a while because I was aware of sort of more like program templates like HLM or Texas method, for early intermediate programs. And, of course they do that, right? They do some version of a heavy day or intensity day, a light day, and then a volume day, which is kind of a medium day, however you want to think about it.
Yeah.
And so I was aware of all these programs, and I'd be like, "What's DUP? Like, what is that program? Like, I've never seen it. Like, I couldn't figure it out until finally, I learned some of the definitions. Like, oh, okay, well, there you go. They're all DUP of some kind or another.
So that's where I was going with this. There's only one type of periodization, if you haven't noticed, because let's go to the phase 2 of the novice linear progression, where you're alternating deadlifts with power cleans, you're alternating bench press with press. Your squat stays linear, right? So you have a linear program with the squat. You're undulating loads with the deadlift and the power clean, the bench press and the press, right? You're conjugating when you're alternating the bench press with the press, the deadlift with the power clean. And then those lifts that you're undulating and conjugating, those are moving up linearly every other workout. See what I mean? You're still adding weight every other workout to that lift. It's just happening over a longer timeline, right? So there's aspects of linear, there's aspect of undulation, and there's aspects of conjugate, right? You're alternating exercises, you're adding weight to the bar every other workout, and then you're adding weight to the bar every workout on the squat. Obviously, that one stays linear the longest. And you're alternating the intensity when you change those exercises. The press is a lower intensity, load-wise, and the bench. You're doing it standing, so you make it harder with a lighter load. You're doing a power clean, which makes a pull harder with a lighter load. You're still using the hips and knees to pick it up, but then you're catching it, right? So a little bit longer range of motion, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the range of motion is a big role in that. In the press, too, right? Much longer range of motion than the bench press.
Exactly, yeah. So the whole point here is that there's one type of periodization, and it starts the moment you get in the gym. So you don't need to think about quote unquote doing periodization. Most of what drives a novice's progress, it's mostly the linear aspect of it, because you're adding weight quite frequently, even if it's every other workout. Let's say, you bench Monday, you press Wednesday, you bench Friday. So every 4 days, or so, you're adding weight to the bench press or the press. The squats every 2 days. The deadlift is maybe every 5 to 7 days once you get to a certain point. So that doesn't mean you're failing. You don't have to add weight every single damn time. And this becomes a problem with the squat because it stays linear the longest. So people just get this idea in their head, because Rip made a comment years ago, and he still makes it, I think, that you want to be a novice as long as you possibly can. Well, there's people that take that literally. What he means is that you should take advantage of the fact that you can progress quickly and maximize all the variables that will support that. Gain weight, eat food, get enough sleep, try to manage your stress levels, right? But when you get to a point where you're squatting 3 times a week, you're, over double body weight on it, and you're barely finishing the rep, your back's failing before your legs.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like dog shit.
It looks like
your
dog
knees
shit,
are caving in.
But remember, the large musculature of the hips and knees combined will keep going much longer than the smaller muscles of the spinal erectors. That's just how it is. You walk on your legs. Your quads and your hip extensors are a mix of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. So they're good for endurance. They're good for strength and power output too. That distribution varies from person to person. We're not getting into fiber typing today or ever. I don't think
Yeah,
it's even
and
necessary.
even more so than that. Like they're just big fucking muscles. Like just look at them. You know, your spinal erectors are not particularly large compared to your glutes. You know, you got these big old slabs of muscle on your backside, and that, of course, those are going to be able to move more weight.
Yeah,
and do it longer. Yeah.
What often happens is people allow their form to break down. You'll see their chest caving, their back rounding, and then they're just still finishing the 3 sets of 5 quote-unquote squats. They're legal in a meet, but fuck, man. Do you want to really fuck your back up just so you could say you added to your 3x5? So
right.
The thing is, when you're doing a rep range for so long, 6 to 9 months, it's real easy to get psychologically fixated on it. You want to have the highest 3x5 ever. You want to be a novice forever. They take it quite literally, to the point where I've known guys that eliminate the other lifts and just squat just so that they can keep going into the 400s, and they're trying to get into the 500s. And meanwhile, they're deadlifting, 315, because their back is so fried, from doing a 2-hour, 3 sets of 5 squats with 450. I've seen this happen. And it's silly, and these guys will not move past LP because it becomes about fives. And ultimately, there comes a point where you're going to level off. And sure, circumstances could be better. But you know what? You have a job. A lot of people are married. A lot of people have kids. A lot of people have lives. You're not an Olympic athlete that could optimize 100% of the variables. And even they can't do that. But as close to 100% of the variables as possible that contribute to performance. You're just not going to do that. So they keep trying to pick at these little micro changes that they can make to eke out another 5 pounds. I say, but if I change this, maybe I could have added another 30 pounds to it, or 40 or 100, or maybe if I weighed an extra 100 pounds, I'll get to 600 on the squat. Guys, you got to draw the line somewhere. And you have 4 or 5 other lifts that you have to deal with, that need to get stronger. Your deadlift needs to get stronger. Your bench press needs to get stronger. Once I've seen 405 for 3 sets of 5 squats with a 335 for 5 deadlift and 175 for 5 bench press. You got a problem there. You've seen it too, Trent. That's why you're laughing.
The tauntaun. The other thing too is what I see much more often than that. I have definitely seen those folks, but much more often than that is I see people that get injured or get so beat up. Maybe they're not injured. Maybe they don't have an actual, they haven't, torn their adductor or something like that.
That was me.
But they're certainly beat up. Everything, things are hurting, their back's hurting, because they've been squatting with their lower back and flexion because it gives out and it gets fatigued, or their knees are caving in, or just some crazy form thing has been going on, and they've just, let it go. And they're just fucked up. And if they're not injured yet, they're going to be. Right? Yeah. If they continue on that pace. That's no good. That's no good. What are you going to do? You're going to bust ass like that for what, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then what? That's not that long.
No, then they'll keep this bullshit going for years sometimes by the time they hire me.
Exactly.
I'm convinced some guys have hired me simply so I can get them off LP because they can't psychologically do it themselves.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely the folks that have a psychological sort of addiction to fives, and I've definitely seen. So all right, so we got to put a caveat out here. When Rip is talking on YouTube or on a podcast, he's talking to rank novices mostly, and when he says "you're a pussy," he's talking to the guy that's never actually done the strength program. He's never just sat down and done the damn program.
That's right.
He didn't DTFP, right? He didn't do the fucking program. That's who he's talking to. And Rip he's made it very clear, if you listen to everything he's put out there, that he's doubled and tripled down on novices, because that's most people out there. But if you're the guy who's actually done a no-shit LP for 3+ months, he's probably not talking to you.
No.
Probably not. So when he says, because I run into guys that are like, oh man, they're afraid to move on from the vanilla novice program, the phase 1 and phase 2 part of the program, because they're like, well, I'm a pussy if I just can't add 5 pounds. That's my problem. I'm just too much of a pussy to do it. And it's like, no, dude, you're not strong enough. Your technique's falling apart. You hit the limit. You hit your limit. Yes, circumstances could always be better. You could always gain a few more pounds, but it's over. So let's move on. So there's definitely that crowd. And then finally, I think there's a lot of people who realize when they've hit a limit at some point, and they just don't know what to do. They're like, okay, I like 3x5 was really easy. I know how to iterate that, but what do I do now?
Yeah. When it stops working, there's a few things you can do. And again, it comes down to manipulating those variables, right? You could undulate the load, which we've talked about. You can squat heavy one day, 80% one day, or you can drop the middle squat entirely. I've done that for some people.
I do that a lot, especially with older folks.
Yeah, so you're either heavy, light, heavy, or 2 heavy days. Or you drop the second heavy day and you do heavy, light, which is what I do for older folks before I eventually move them to 1 squat a week. You could move the deadlift. Deadlift basically goes to intermediate first because it's the most taxing. You're basically doing a heavy, light, medium. You're deadlifting heavy one day. You're doing a chin up one day. And then you're doing a power clean or some sort of lighter pull the third day. Depending on the person.
A chin up is a pull, by the way. We would consider that a pull, a light pull. But
I would consider that a pull. I don't like. There's not enough isometric work in it for me to consider that a medium pull.
No, definitely. No, it's definitely a very light pull.
I like that as a light day pull. I don't like that as a direct alternative to the deadlift. I'd rather use a variant where there's some isometrics involved. I like the RDL because there's no stress off the floor, but you still have to maintain spinal position with a heavy enough weight.
Love RDLs.
Yeah, me too. Oh God, they're fucking hard. But anyways, so you can undulate the load. You can conjugate, like I just said with the deadlift, heavy, light, medium. That's basically a combination of DUP, daily undulated periodization. You're doing a heavy day, a light day, a medium day. And you're conjugating because you're alternating the exercises. You're deadlifting one day, you're doing a chin up one day, and then you're doing a power clean or a pulling variant one day, right? A deadlift variant, because a pull up is a pull, a chin up's a pull. And you could drop the reps as your intensity goes up to keep it, keep the linear going, right? So some people do 3x3. Women go to 5x3 after about 8 weeks. Instead of 3x5, they go to 5x3, right? So it's still, you're keeping it linear, but you're keeping it linear at a lower rep range, right? While continuing to increase the intensity incrementally. So
yeah, and I think that's an important point. That's for now. I will make an exception for older folks, and by older, I'm really talking about the 60+ crowd. Because often the squat it taxes the soft tissues in a way that may be hard for them to hard for the soft tissue to keep up with. So for instance, if the low bar position for a 64-year-old guy really taxes the flexibility of his shoulders and his chest, then sometimes he needs to go to 3x3 because that's all he can tolerate. With the grip, even if his back and his legs could tolerate a little bit more volume. But for everyone else, I like to hold the volume the same as long as possible. So, that's you just said it, but I just wanted to underline that point, right? If you're going from 3 sets of 5 and you stall out on that, if you flip it to 5 sets of 3, it's the same volume, right? You're still doing 15 total work reps. You've just changed the set and rep scheme.
And I see that approach work really well with female lifters, older lifters, where the weight's lighter. But what I've noticed with strong male lifters, the volume has to go down when you're getting to limit triples because they just start to kick the shit out of you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So that's a great point, especially on the heavy lifts. Yeah, like the squat.
And I'm talking about the squat and the deadlift.
Yeah, and what I find is like when I do that. So if I flip a guy, and I don't often do 5x3 on the squat. Sometimes I do, but if I do that might be like a week. So if the guy's squatting twice a week, he might go to 5x3s for like 1 week, and then after that, he's probably going to 3x3 or top sets and back off sets.
That's right.
Because for the same reason, it's at that point when you get strong enough, it's not so much about the total volume; it's actually about the dose of stress that you're getting from the set. So 3 sets, even if it's only 9 total reps, can be the same dose of stress as 15 reps in 5 sets for a weaker lifter.
Yep.
Yeah. So right. There definitely is there's a threshold there.
Yeah. So then once you have exhausted all those various options you can do, there's another option before I kind of move on to the next topic. Another option is you could do a single set and lighter sets, quote unquote back off sets, right?
Right. Right. Yes.
Rip doesn't like them. And I think for a novice, it kind of makes sense, but he just generally says, well, if it's heavy enough, why you need all that, And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier with the triples. If you're doing a heavy triple, you're well over 90% of max. Whether you measured a max or not, that's a pretty good, safe, conservative estimate. You're over 90% of max. It's heavy. It's going to take some recovery. But what I will say is that I find it effective because you get more reps with the exercise, you get more practice, and some people just need that volume, especially if the weight's lighter. Now, I think where Rip's coming from are the training loads he was using, 4 to 500, low 4s to mid 5s probably, when he was competing.
Yeah.
And absolute load matters. This doesn't get enough attention when people are discussing this stuff.
Yeah.
Beyond a certain point, if you're squatting, in the 4s and deadlifting in the 5s, you don't need a lot of sets. My programming now is so lazy, and I'm still making PRs. Lazy in the sense that I don't need to do that much volume because the intensity is so damn high,
Right. Yeah. It's about, and I think the better way to think about it, especially at a certain level, is that it's about the like I just said, dose of stress that you're getting, not the total. It's not just what's the tonnage, that was popular a couple years ago, tonnage, right? The sets times the reps times the weight.
Yeah,
right?
Volume load, I think it was called once.
Yeah, exactly. So, yes, that can matter, but frankly, I never look at tonnage. It's just a byproduct of the other things I'm looking at. But yeah,
let's put some. Let's fucking tonnage.
Yeah, you're fucking nerd if you track your tonnage. I'm sorry.
That's an academic argument. These academics will argue for 15s and 20s and light weights because they'll say, "Oh, the tonnage is equal."
But the tonnage,
match the tonnage. It's like that's a mathematical expression.
I know some coaches right now that. Well, let's put some hard numbers on it though, just as to illustrate that point you just made, because I agree with you. It doesn't get enough attention. I find the top sets and back off thing that's pretty useful for a guy, let's say, in the high 200s with his squat. Let's say he's squatting 275 and he ran into a wall somewhere around 250, 260. So we start doing top sets and back off sets. So we might do, let's say he runs into a wall at 260 for 3 sets of 5, and he's starting to miss reps he's starting to fail on that last set of 5 at 260. So we might go the next time 265 for 1 set of 5, because remember, he's been hitting his first 2 sets okay. It's the last set that's the problem. So then we might go 265 for 1 set of 5, and then 2 sets of 5 at like 90% of that, which would be 240, right? Just round up to 240. Okay, and when we run that, the top set and back off up to like 275, 280, I find that's pretty good, because when the he's strong enough that his back off sets are still appreciably heavy, right? He's still squatting in the mid 2s on his back off sets. But generally, I find a lot of guys run into like some mental hurdles as well when they're in that range, and it's sort of they can get up for one good set.
Missing reps really fucks with people's head.
Oh, it's brutal. Yeah, it's brutal.
Especially if you've missed more than once.
Yes, definitely. And so, it allows them to sort of mentally just sort of get up and get hyped for one heavy set, and then the other 2 are sort of, because you've had that feeling of the heavy set on your back, the 275 on your back, when you go to do 250, it doesn't feel as heavy, right? So there's a psychological kind of thing going on there. Now, to your point, though, if you've got a guy who can do 405 for a set of 5 or a set of 3, having that guy do a back off set at like 90%, you're talking about 365.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work. It's way too much.
When I was doing that kind of weight, so I was hitting 405 for 5. Yeah. That would typically be it, and then a week later I'd do 365 for 4 sets of 5.
Yeah, sure, exactly. It's appropriate as a volume stimulus, but not as a trying to hit just a bunch of back off sets to get the total volume of 15 reps in.
Exactly. So, to bring this to the next level here, you've ran out LP, you've exhausted all these options. Now you have to decide what you're going to do next. Well, that really depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to, chase the limits of your strength or chase the limits of your muscle mass, then you're going to have to tailor your training that way. And you're going to do more permutations of, DUP, cycling through exercises, weekly progression, bi-weekly progression, tri-weekly progressions, monthly progression, quarterly progression, depending on how long you do this. Most of you listening will never get to that point because you're going to get sick, your kid's going to get sick, you're going to go out of town, you're going to get fired, your boss is going to be an asshole for a week and make you work 18-hour days. You might get a divorce, somebody might die. All this shit will get in the way. And all that shit is more important than training for many people,
Yes.
even
Yeah.
our best clients, this is a secondary thing or even a tertiary thing, or quaternary thing, it's not at the top of people's priorities. We're not strength athletes.
Yeah,
So
sure.
most people will recycle variations of, late novice, early intermediate programming just for years because they just have to start over a lot, And,
Yeah, things happen. You take 10, 15% off the bar, maybe 20, it depends on how long it's been, and you start back at that weight, whatever that is, and you do a linear progression again. You go back to the basic novice program.
And over a long enough timeline, the trend line is still up,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
nice. But let's say that you are an enthusiast like myself or like Trent here, and you keep going, right? Well, my goal is I want to add as much weight to the bar as I can and not get hurt, so I'm pretty conservative with it. I may eventually get hurt. It's not completely avoidable if you
It happens.
keep chasing numbers, but it's what I do. I got so used to adding that I'm like, well, I'm gonna try and add. Okay, I'll do one set this week, a few sets next week, one squat a week, one deadlift a week, et cetera. And all these different variations of what we've discussed here, periodization, right? But then I get questions about other things that can be done, right? So I might have somebody complain that they feel like their cardio is shit, that they're not conditioned, What about cardio?
Yes.
I'll answer that.
Oh, yeah.
The more popular question that I get, given my secondary line of work, my other skill set over there, that we talk about here, is, I got kind of fat doing linear progression, or I put a little bit of a belly on, when can I lose that, And, the same rules apply. You got to periodize your nutrition too. And this is where it gets a little complicated. When you're on starting strength. So the most common question I get is, how do I lose the belly on starting strength? And I say, well, you can lose some of it, but in general, it's not a cutting program. It's not a weight loss program. It is a strength program. One of the assumptions to the novice linear progression is that you are in caloric surplus or caloric maintenance at best, assuming you are overweight enough to pull additional calories from your fat stores,
Right, right.
Maintenance is kind of bullshit. You're probably actually in a deficit, but a small, tiny deficit for a very overweight or obese person will probably be fine. But by very overweight, very obese, I'm not talking about the skinny fat guy or the mildly overweight guy. I'm talking about the 300-pound guy who's losing weight and getting stronger and putting muscle on, fitting into clothes, his deadlifts feeling better, all those things. Not the frickin', 5'10", 190-pound guy that, is complaining about his man boobs and, a little bit of a, he's chubby, not,
Right.
really fat,
Yeah.
but chubby. Being a little bit chubby gives you leverage, and that's useful for a novice, right? But let's say you don't want to stay chubby. I'm not here to decide what you should look like. Let's say you ran LP, you put enough weight on to satisfy your needs, and you want to change your body composition and lose the chub, and you're willing to have Rip make fun of you at that seminar next year because you just don't care, right? Well, at that point, you have to plan your training around your diet. Versus before you're planning your diet around your training, right? When you're a novice, you have to eat a lot of food to facilitate those increases in weight on the bar. And you have to be willing to gain as much weight as necessary to optimize your leverage and to put on the muscle mass that comes with that, right? Now you're trying to change your body composition in a way that requires you to pull resources away from strength training. That's what's happening essentially. And pay close attention here because the same principle applies to other physical activities and other things, right? So we are now pulling calories away. So if we're pulling calories away, we can't push ourselves like a competitive strength athlete anymore, Not that we're necessarily doing that on LP. It becomes that at the very end. You're grinding out reps, workout after workout.
However you slice it, it's really hard at the very end. Yeah.
At the very end, it's not for everybody. Some guys in the business won't even take their clients there because, you get attrition, but when you're grinding out 3 sets of 5 squats 3 times a week, people quit over it. And it's not just about losing money. You lose a trainee in general. That's one less person under the bar. And we don't want that. If somebody wants to, discontinue my service and do it on their own, I'm fine with that. What I don't want is them leaving because I've grinded them to the freaking ground and they hate even looking at a barbell, and I saw that happen when I was a rookie coach because I was willing to do it. So I assumed, everybody wants results. That's what you got to do, right? And when, I've had people hate lifting. One girl wanted to test herself once a long time ago. I'm like, well, by the time you finish this, you're going to hate it. Texas method, that really gets
people weeded out if they try to
Oh,
run.
yeah,
If you try to run, if you try to run out Texas method, you will stop lifting by the end of it, or fuck around at the gym at best. And I had one girl basically went out of her mind. I think my cousin tried it. He went out of his mind, and they both kept going to the gym. My cousin kept fucking around. The other girl, I'm actually talking about Jules, one of my dietitians on my website. She hated it and wanted to just fuck around in the gym and still do the barbell lifts, and she did. And it took her 7 years to compete again after that.
Oh man!
But she ran it out. She never actually got to the singles. She was doing doubles, and she's like, "Fuck this! I'm done. I'm fucking done."
Yeah.
And I told somebody else about that. And this girl I was training was like, "I'm going to run it out to the end." Well, she did, and then she also stopped training very seriously. And I'm like, "Yeah, I told you you're going to hate lifting." All of them still do barbells, but my point is, LP's not. It becomes like competitive lifting at the very end.
Yeah, sure.
And at this, back to my point, when you're deciding that you want to lose body fat, you're restricting calories. You can't do that. You can't grind high intensities to freaking basically failure on low calories. It doesn't work. So the most popular thing that has been done throughout history is bodybuilders do reps and spend time on machines to not have to rely on so much spinal stability while they're losing weight. Because remember, the back is the thing that fails. I'm not suggesting that. I don't like machines, right? But I'll do some light 10s, 60% or so, and start there and add, because that's what I do. I don't do many sets of them, 1 to 2 tops. As soon as the first one gets hard enough to finish, I don't do a second one, or I do a back off, And, you could do the other stuff, the machines, to add volume in, but you still got to do your basics, But the whole point is, or you can do more sets. If you want to spend the time in the gym, you can do more sets, right? 6 sets of 5 or whatever, with a lighter weight, It's silly, but again, you are tailoring your training to your diet now, versus on LP, you are tailoring your diet to your training, right?
Right. Yeah.
Your diet's, there's still certain things you have to do. Your protein has to stay high, but your energy macros, your carbs and fat, those got to come down. Fat first, then carbs, for obvious reasons. You want to minimize the damage that you're doing to your performance by trying to spare the carbs to the maximum extent that you can. But at the end of the day, both of those macros are coming down. The protein staying the same to hold on to the muscle mass.
Yeah, and I just want to avoid some confusion here, right? Because I think sometimes people think, "Oh man, if I do 10s, I'm going to get bigger." Like that's hypertrophy range, right? And it's like, well, yeah, but again, like hypertrophy, if you're trying to add muscle mass and do like bodybuilding type stuff, that also relies on you being in somewhat of a caloric surplus, right? You have to eat more food to grow the extra muscle mass. So that's not what we're talking about in this case. In this case, we're just trying to preserve as much muscle mass as we can. And like you said, because we are tailoring now the training to the diet, it's just the best that you can do given the circumstances. So I some people think they're like, "Oh man, I'm going to get like really jacked while I'm cutting." It's like, no, that's not, just because you're doing 10s doesn't mean you're doing hypertrophy.
I mean, it's a novel stimulus, so you might see something happen.
You might get a little bump. Yeah, sure.
But you're not, even if you're training 10s because you want to, get hypertrophy, you run into the same situation. You have to add weight to the bar incrementally over a long enough timeline. And eventually it gets hard and it gets grindy, and you have to set new PRs at that rep range.
Yes.
Or you have to do so many sets that's exhausting. You eventually require more resources. But if you're just a chubby guy that wants to look like you train, and you don't care that you're going to weigh nothing at the end, not literally nothing, but you're going to be lighter, then you have to basically hold on to the protein, spare the carbs to the maximum extent that you can, and lower the fat as much as you can lower that, and keep your volume higher, your intensity lower, because that's what you're able to do at that time. You're able to do lighter weights, either for more reps or more sets, or throw a bunch of assistance exercises in there, whatever you decide to do. That's not what this episode's about, but the point is, your nutrition is also periodized, and your training is also periodized in accordance to how you're eating if you have body composition goals that you're playing around with. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
So, yeah, in contrast, if you decide, well, fuck this cutting shit, I want to get strong, then now you're flipping the script. Your intensity can go up, your calories can go up, your carbs can go up, your fat can go up, and the weight on the bar is going to go up. Any power lifter will tell you that if you train at high intensities, not even power lifters, anybody in our circle too, not all of us are power lifters, strength lifters, just casual gym trainees are trying to add weight to the bar. They will all tell you that if they try to train at a high intensity with low calories, it doesn't happen. Us coaches have watched this. When somebody bonks, you can tell when they haven't eaten, or when they haven't slept.
Yeah.
And that when the reps are high, there's an endurance component. So, and less of a, maximal strength component. So you can push through that on less resources because it's fucking lighter, It's tiresome. You feel like shit, and I do a limit set of 8 with, close to 200 kilos on the deadlift. I mean, I need to hit that, by the way. 197.5 for 8.
Okay.
Anyways.
Yeah, you're pretty close. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, then I got sick the week after, so I'm working back up. But yeah, that beat the piss out of me, But I was hungry, I was tired, and every week I would come in, I'd be like, man, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm doing 400 plus for 8 to 10 reps. I don't want to fucking do this. I don't know if I got it. Then I do them, you get through them because it's fucking lighter, right?
Right.
Doing 70 to 80% of max, it's not 90 to 100% of max. So intensity matters here.
Going back to the cardio thing that you mentioned, because that's another thing that I run into is people get, 2, 3, 4 months into the novice LP, and now they are diverting most of their resources, most of those extra calories and all of their recovery resources that they have available toward the goal of getting stronger. And then something happens. They're like, oh man, I'm going to go try out, I'm going to go mountain biking or just some activity they enjoy that they haven't done in a little while. Because it's, they've been starting this new program and they're getting used to hitting the gym 3 days a week and actually, lifting with a barbell. And so they go back to some activity that they've done in the past and then they suck at it. They're just they have no gas. They're like, what's going on? They're like, oh, what's the point of all this gym stuff, right? I thought it'd be stronger.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I've had that several times. The mountain biking in particular, there's one guy I can think of that was really upset that he, his mountain biking was worse. And it's like, okay, first of all, it's been 3 months since you've been on the bike. I don't know about you, but when I get on a bike and it's been 3+ months, then I'm not particularly good at it because there's some acclimation, to being on the bike. You gotta be able to handle sitting on the saddle. That's half the problem for me.
Yep.
But the other more important thing here is that you are in a recovery hole towards the end of novice linear progression, right? That's part of the reason that we have to do this periodization is that you can't recover anymore and be fresh 48 hours between workouts, right? You're past that point. Now you have to do a light squat or a light pull or, have to do all these tricks that we talked about earlier to get enough recovery between your heavy lifts.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing applies to outside activities in life is that, you're going to have to let this period play out. Because if you try to go add something else that's a vigorous activity, then what's going to happen is you're going to suck at it. And it's not that your cardio sucks, quote unquote. It's really that you're going out there and you are already very fatigued. You're carrying it from the lifting that you're doing. So yeah, you're going to feel like you have dead legs and you've got no gas. That will go away because eventually you get to a longer periodization, a longer microcycle, right? Where you're only lifting heavy once a week or, once every other week. And then when that happens, all of a sudden on your lighter lifting days, you have a little bit more gas because you've recovered and you've also improved your ability to recover. Your work capacity is improving. So as those things go up, all of a sudden it becomes much easier to go, mountain biking or whatever on the weekend and not feel dead. So I just wanted to cover that because that's a very common complaint.
So that was the next and last point that I wanted to hit is when you in the strength and conditioning literature, they talk about how these meso and macro cycles pertaining to strength and conditioning for athletes that participate in other sports, football, basketball, mountain biking, whatever, how it's planned around the sport, right? So when you're playing football or you have a biking race coming up, that is considered season, right? In season.
Yes.
So you're doing you're spending a lot of time on that activity. You're spending a lot of time on the bike. You're spending a lot of time in the field. That's the more general term that we'll use. You're spending more time in the field for your sport of choice, right?
Right.
So in this situation, strength training is not for the purpose of competing in a strength sport like weightlifting, powerlifting, strength lifting, right?
Right.
Or bodybuilding, right? your strength training to improve these other sports. So that's kind of what these guys are talking about. Well, what the hell? What's with all this strength shit? I can't even ride a bike, right? So the same thing kind of happens. LP is something that you want to do in your quote-unquote off-season. So these are things you have to think about. Recreational athletes don't think about this as much as professional athletes or, collegiate athletes or even youth high school athletes. These people that do things recreationally don't really have any of this in mind. They just want to bike all year. They want to lift all year. They want to play basketball all year, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Typically, let me see if I remember my jargon correctly. You have your preparatory phase, and that's typically when you do these hypertrophy type mesocycles that have, more of an endurance component for the lifting. And by endurance, I mean like 8 to 12 reps, So it's more like bodybuilding. You're doing more rehab stuff, more general strength training type activities. It's not very specific, and the intensity is not high. The volume's high, the intensity is lower. And then as you move along through the curve, you move towards higher intensity, lower volume, and fewer assistance exercises, right? It becomes more specific. You're trying to get overall strength and power, right? Well, those phases are timed around the sport. And the frequency at which in the weight room is also timed around the sport. So in the off season, they might go and try to get their squats up. They're not going to max out because they don't compete in powerlifting, but they might hit some heavy triples and fives. And let's say that you're in a winter sport. Say in the summer, they're hitting the weights heavy. By the fall, now they're in their preseason, so that means less time in the weight room. Now they're not going 3-4 days a week; they're going 2 days a week or 1 day a week. And then when their season starts and they're playing games and competing, they may not even be squatting or leg pressing or doing any big compounds. They might just be fucking around in the weight room doing rehab type stuff and trying to maintain, right? Or doing lower intensities. Yes, so more endurance related stuff and nothing to failure, right? Because everything is centered around competing in that sport. So let's say that most recreational people I talk to, they're runners, cyclists, they do stuff like that. There's no real recreational football at our age, because our joints can't take that kind of shit. But people might play basketball or other things, and I'll say, if you want to get stronger and build muscle over a long enough timeline and maintain the performance in your sport, then you have to plan points of the year where you're spending less time playing the sport and more time training, which means that, your performance is going to drop, but then there's other times of the year where you're going to be playing more basketball, riding the bike more, running more, and you're never doing zero, by the way, because that is your primary sport. You're always doing something, right, for that. And the same rule applies to diet. If you want to lose weight, you have to plan that at a certain time of year so that you can drop your strength training performance so that you can lose whatever body fat you want to lose, right? So that's really what it is. It kind of comes back to that, right? The more time you have to spend on an alternative activity or losing body fat, the less time you can spend at high-intensity strength training, right?
Yeah. We've said it before on the show, and it's just you'll keep running into this over and over. It's like you can't be maximal at everything.
No,
right? You can't pursue
really
everything to the max. Yeah, exactly. So, but the idea is that year over year, with some sort of macro cycle like you're talking about, if you have a season that you train around, the year over year you do actually improve from season to season. You come into each season a little bit stronger than you did last time. And those incremental gains stack up over a period of years, and
it happens over a long enough timeline.
Exactly.
Just remember, you're not a power lifter, you're not a strength lifter, and if you have another sport that's more important to you, if you're a biker, a runner, a hiker, etc., and that's your thing, that means weight on the bar beyond that initial novice phase is going to go up even slower than somebody who's a power lifter. Right? Or a strength lifter or a weight lifter. It's going to go up slower. You're going to add a little bit each year because you're only going to be able to spend 3 to 6 months on it seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you know what? You may not even do some of the basic movements, right? You may find things that are a little bit more, like you said, more rehab oriented, or maybe just something that facilitates your sport better, right? So like if you're an MMA fighter or something like that, like you may not do low bar squats. If you can, you should, but you may end up doing like box squats or something. I don't know, some variation of that, and it's fine. But yeah, that's the whole point. Is you're thinking about this conceptually of like, what is my goal, and the training suits that goal. So if the goal is to get stronger, then you do the low bar squat, do the deadlift. If the goal is to be prepared for your sport, then you do what you need to do to be prepared for that sport. And
it's just time and place. We lift weights to get stronger. So, in your off season, you're going to do the main lifts. Once you're in season, you might want to spare some of those joints so that you can move around fast and not pull something, you know, because you squatted or deadlifted that week, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So you may only deadlift, you know, once a month. You may only squat once a month and throw some leg presses in there. I mean, I don't know. It just depends on the person. But
So
you know, I know I
individual,
get, I look at myself after a heavy deadlift and how tight I get. I'm like, if I had to like do rapid movements and agility type shit, I'd probably tweak my back all the time, you know?
Yeah. No
so
40-yard dashes for you.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a time and place where you have to plan these things, right? If your other activities are more important than lifting, then you have to block out 3 to 6 months where you're just going to lift and barely do the other thing, right? And you're going to do it very light, you know, so that you can lift. And then it's going to flip and you're going to lift less and really focus on the thing that it is you want to do. So that's really, I think we hammered that, you know, we beat that to death. So, you know, that's a good stopping point for me.
I hope you have a good understanding now of like sort of the big picture of post-novice programming. It's hard. It's so hard to talk about this stuff because it becomes so individual beyond that immediate phase after the novice program. It becomes so individual to the person that, you know, we could just talk about a million different iterations. So what you end up having to do is you end up having to talk about the philosophy of this stuff rather than, you know, just hard sets and reps and percentages.
Yeah. There's not enough data points, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say, you know, one thing that if you are, because, you know, most people are novices, and if you're in that spot and you're wondering about like all those little tweaks and parlor tricks that we talked about in extending your novice gains through the quote unquote advanced novice period, just remember the important thing for you is to get stronger at that phase of your training. Your goal is strength. So just do whatever you have to do to keep the weight on the bar going up. That's the most important thing. Keep your goal on that.
That's right.
And you'll be fine.
Excellent. All right, let's sign off. Thank you for tuning into the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. The gym is found at weights _and _plates.
Very good. Very good. You can find me at jonesbarbellclub.com, or you can find me on Instagram, marmalade_cream.